Everybody knows got the writing right here on the paper. Now, come on.
We all know you're a nicotine addict. Anyway, the guy planted me, and it didn't dawn on me till later, till I called a few friends who'd also been busted and said, "Did you have stuff?" One of them said, "Yeah, I did have stuff. It was on the table. They didn't even notice it. They planted a whole pile in my bedroom." You know, he had it out on the table, some marijuana. So the guy was a rip-off, and he's in jail, and half that drug department's in jail, too.
But now, you thought that all you'd have to do was pay the $100 fine, but then what happened?
Well, I did just pay the fine, you know, and that was the end of it, and it went in the papers, whoopee, and another pop star bites the dust, you know. And then I came over to America and just, with no particular decision, decided that I'd like to live here, you know. I came over for a visit or something, and I was always coming and going and coming and going, and Yoko had been educated here, and she was always going on to me about New York, you know, and she finally showed it me and walked me around. And I fell in love with it, and we thought, get an apartment instead of staying in a hotel all the time.
Surely.
So the next minute we thought, hey, well, let's stay, you know, isn't it great? So we also had other complications going on. The show isn't long enough for it, about her ex-husband running away with her daughter, and there was court cases in Houston, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we had to keep applying for these visas, and after you bust, it's suggested that you don't apply for 9 months, you know, and people now have problems getting in. Mick Jagger, Stones, lots of musicians, Paul, lots of people they have to sort of do a lot of ritual to get in before they can come and go. So we tried to say, look, we have this big case, we need to come in, and there was always a hassle and a hassle and a hassle, and then they started trying to throw me out.
All right, so we're at the point now where it might be helpful to have Mr. Wilds, your attorney, present, just so that nothing is said that might prejudice.
Well, it's really in case you have a question that I can't answer. You know, they ask me what's happening with you, and I say, well, there's some paper went to some senator that called, and I don't know who
All right, fine. You were told it might be a good idea to wait for 9 months before applying for citizenship?
No, this was after the bust in England, before applying to visit the United States. That it would be a cool idea. That's sort of, you know, it would be a cool idea.
What is your status in the country right now?
That's why Leon's here. What am I, Leon?
Well, John was charged with being deportable in the United States for being an overstay by a very interesting turn of events. The district director of the New York Immigration Service charged him with being an overstay after he gave him a 2-week extension of his time. And in the middle of that 2-week period, he
was here on visa, right? And he overstayed? Is that the position?
He had originally come in as a visitor, and he had had a number of extensions. And then finally, the Immigration Service gave him a 2-week extension. And right in the midst of that 2-week final extension, they revoked the period that they had given him, and they declared that he had been here as an overstay for the week that he had been here with their authorization, and thus the Immigration Service created the very status that they charged him with being deportable for. We fought that deportation case, and a decision was finally rendered after about a year that he was, in fact, an overstay. Now, the essential problem in a deportation case and what lies beneath the surface is that the only way one can get out of it is either to ask permission to leave this country voluntarily and get out, which John was not prepared to do, or to apply for permanent resident status. And the law prescribes that any person who had ever been convicted of any offense, no matter how small, relating to the possession of marijuana, at any time in his lifetime and under any circumstances, cannot obtain residence. And so that what was happening when the government did this little routine of revoking his stay and charging him with being an overstay, they were locking him actually into a position where the only application he could make was one which they were pretty sure he could never succeed in.
Which was?
Pardon?
The application that he would make would be one that he would never succeed in. Permanent residence.
Yes.
All right.
Now, we applied for permanent residence for John and for Yoko. We won Yoko's case, and she was granted residence, but John's case was denied. We went up on appeal before the Board of Immigration Appeals, and we lost there as well. And we are now before the United States Circuit Court of Appeals on the same issue. And basically, on that case, the issue resolves itself into whether or not what happened in England amounts to possession under our law, and whether what he possessed in England was actually marijuana under our law. You see, the substance which John was convicted of possessing, he pleaded guilty, was called cannabis resin. That's a generic term, and it includes a number of substances. We had one of the top experts in the United States, a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, testify, and he gave the only expert testimony. And his testimony was that cannabis resin is not marijuana, and marijuana is not cannabis resin. Yet the Immigration Service came to the conclusion that it was marijuana. And finally, with respect to the possession aspect, our law in the United States is very clear with respect to possession. You cannot be convicted in this country for possessing an illicit substance unless it is clear that you had a knowledge as to the illicit nature of the substance that you had.
Mm-hmm.
In England, at the time of John's conviction, a law existed which had been uniformly criticized throughout the world and which was later repealed. And it provided that the government did not have to prove that you knew the nature of the substance whatsoever. So that if you possessed a bottle and you thought it had aspirin in it, and in fact, if the aspirin turned out to be some serious drug, you must have pleaded guilty under those circumstances because there was no way out. And that actually was the legal situation that forced John into this, and that's where we stand with respect to the immigration.
I know that this is not a excuse me.
Yeah, I was just going to say one interesting point was that when they started the initial case, they claimed that it was a local New York problem, and they also started the proceedings against John and Yoko. Well, halfway or a third of the way through the proceedings, or whatever the number is, they discovered that actually Yoko did not have any record in England, and also she had a green card by a previous American husband. So this local case that was just another case like any other alien, which is what they kept claiming, was not one of those cases. So then they suddenly had to find something else, which was this overstay business, which they pulled a fast one. And so they had to give Yoko the green card. And now one of them, I think his name is Green, keeps writing to the papers saying they're still treating me like a normal citizen, a normal alien, right, only on overstay. They're no longer mentioning about marijuana and the original normal reason I was being thrown out. And it's just interesting that the case keeps changing to suit them, you know?
I know that this is not a satisfactory question, but maybe you have a satisfactory answer for it. You know, when all of us were little, we were told, why try to be someplace where they tell you that you're not wanted? You know, if you go over to a friend's house and his mother says, hey, I don't want you around, you come home. You could live almost anywhere you wanted to in this world.
Yeah.
And so if you're getting hassled this way, and this does not in any way negate the incorrectness of the hassle, if it is, as your attorney states, why put up with it?
Because I'd like to live in the land of the free, Tom. And also, if it was up to Joe Doe on the street, he either doesn't care about it or would be glad to have an old beetle living here, you know? You know, if I get in a cab with a cab driver, it has nothing to do with music or anything. He'll ask me, how you doing? I hope you can stay. So on your average citizen either doesn't care or wouldn't mind me staying here. I like to be here because this is where the music came from. This is what influenced my whole life and got me where I am today, as it were. And I love the place. I'd like to be here. I've got a lot of friends here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I want to be, you know. Statue of Liberty, welcome. I even brought my own cash.
Brooklyn Bridge, want to buy it?
No, you're the ones that buy our bridges.
There is another case which we haven't discussed, and that is our case against the government.
You've got one against them.
That's true.
Yeah.
We've gone to the court on 3 separate occasions, but the action that I'm talking about is the selective prosecution action. We had some information that the deportation proceedings against John were not normally brought. Certainly the procedure followed was not normal. And we had learned that rumors got to the Senate Internal Security Committee that John had some idea, or was rumored to have some idea, of appearing at the Republican National Convention in 1972. and leading an anti-Vietnam War demonstration or the like. And that this information in the form of a memorandum was transmitted by Senator Strom Thurmond to the then Attorney General, John Mitchell, who may have at the time been sitting with the other hat as well as head of CREEP, the Committee to
Re-elect
the President.
Yes, the former president.
And we understand that a series of memoranda led all the way down to the district director in New York, and that the action he took was not as a result of John's immigration status, but rather as a result or an intention to prevent John from exercising constitutionally protected rights.
What are they afraid of you doing if you have permanent residence here?
I don't know. I think when it was started, somebody didn't want me here, and now they probably don't mind, you know. It's just that it's a bureaucratic thing. It's gone on, and how do we stop it? You know, maybe whoever makes the decision doesn't know whether it'd be either politically right or what's going to happen if we suddenly stop now when we started it. I mean, it's very sort of embarrassing for everyone, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that half the people that started it are now having their own problems, right? So I don't know where I am. I know there's a different lot of people in charge of my case now, and I'm sure they're not as hot to get me out because they didn't even have the Republican convention in San Diego, and I was not committed to go there either. Mm-hmm. So
I have less than 1 minute left. You know, you've been a very low-key and very mild-mannered guest on this program, and yet I've heard you described as being an egomaniac, and I'm having a little trouble understanding that description of you vis-a-vis the way that you've really been during this hour we spent together. Why would you be called that?
Because one gets a reputation, you know, for one thing or other, whether it's true or false. If being an egomaniac means I believe in what I do and my art or my music, in that respect, you can call me that, you know, and I believe in what I do, and I'll say it, you know. And otherwise, this is pretty much me, you know, apart from being on TV, you know.
Well, you're one of the nicest egomaniacs I've ever met.
Well, so are you, Tom.
Of course, it can be said for the record, and I'm certain you all know that following that program, John Lennon was in fact granted permanent residence here in the United States and lived here in New York with his wife Yoko until he died last night. My next guest is the syndicated columnist Lisa Robinson, who recently did an exclusive article on John Lennon in the New York Post. In it, she says that she was impressed with his great sense of humor, his devoted family life, and his overall gentleness. These aren't pleasant circumstances, but I want to ask you about, first of all, about just watching this thing again with John Lennon. Here in the studio, we were talking about, you know, I had the long hair, and some of the ladies were saying they were wearing mini skirts at the time, and go-go boots, and white shoes and stuff, and we were all kind of laughing about things that we did 5 and 6 years ago when that tape was made. So it was kind of fun to see that again.
And well, that was right around the time when John also sort of started to stay home. And he didn't disappear, really. He was very much with his family for 5 years. And he looked quite different than the way
he was going through a long
looked.
hair period, too, at the time.
Yeah.
He was almost...
Although not a leisure suit period.
No, well, they made me wear those then, sad to say. He was kind of like a house husband there for
yes, that's what he
5
said.
years,
The last time that we spoke, he said that he was, in fact, a house husband, and that the most important thing for him was to be with his family, to be with Yoko, and to be with his 5-year-old son, Sean. And he said, you know, people are angry at me because I'm not working, because I'm not making records, but that's, why should they be angry? Because I'm doing what I want to do. He said, I've been famous for 12 to 15 years. There's been incredible pressure. I don't want to just keep churning out the same stuff just because I can do it well, just because I'm a craftsman. And he felt that the time had come for him to get to know his son, because he felt he had missed out on that with his first child, who's now, I think, 17, his first son, Julian. And he really wanted to stay home. He always said he liked hanging around the house anyway, that writing songs was hanging around the house, except instead of writing songs, now he was writing menus. And I said to him, well, what did you do every day? And he said, well, I got up and I would make breakfast. And breakfast was a big deal, and I would make something for Yoko, and if she would wake up and she'd be in a funk and she'd have a bad day ahead of her with business, because Yoko self-admittedly handled the family business, which you can imagine was extensive in
But
their
then
case.
she did it all the contractual...
She's an amazing businesswoman, very strong woman, really. And so she took care of the family business, and he took care of the house, and he did the breakfast.